Hi, Frankie. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm just checking to see if everything is good. Hi, Choi. Hi, Kev. God bless. How is everyone? Can you hear me good? So I know it's been a bit since I've been on here, but I wanted to come on because I've read through 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and now I'm on 2 Kings. And I really should have done this in the beginning when I started all of this. But I wanted to come on here and I wanted to share, what I've read and what I have learned. It's been an amazing experience reading 1 Samuel. Wonderful experience. I'm going to be reading, it's a new one I have. It's the NLT, the Life Application Study Bible. And this is a commentary. So I'm going to be reading the commentary as I'm reading through this. So, 1 Samuel. Samuel was a prophet, okay? And hold on, I'm trying to see on here. Sorry, he is a priest, not a prophet. He is a priest. Let me just read this. So Eli and Samuel. Israel has been ruled by judges for over 200 years. Samuel is the last of those judges. Born near the end of the high priest Eli's life, Samuel grows up in the tabernacle as a priest in training under Eli and is well qualified to serve Israel as both a priest and a judge. Although the nation has fallen away from God, it is clear that God is preparing Samuel from the very beginning to lead the nation back to right living. God is always in control, and he is able to bring his people back. Hi, Carol. So, that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to stop because I want to explain using the commentary in here. Yeah, looks like, what is that? I see an error. Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me and everything. Okay, so Elkanah and his family. This is Samuel's birth and childhood. There was a man named Elkanah who lived in Ramah in the region of Zuph in the hill country of Ephraim. He was the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph of Ephraim. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to read because these names always get me confused. Like every time we go through the names, it's a lot of names. So the book of 1 Samuel begins in the days when the judges still ruled Israel, possibly during the closing years of Samson's life. Samuel was Israel's last judge and the first priest and prophet to serve during the time of a king. He was the best example of what a good judge should be, governing the people by God's word and not by his own impulses. Samuel was the man who anointed Saul as Israel's first king. Although this chapter begins with "there was a man," Hannah and her faith are the real focus of this story. Elkanah had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. So in the commentary it says, although many great Old Testament leaders such as Abraham, Jacob, David had more than one wife, this was not God's original intention for marriage, nor is it his intention today. Genesis chapter 2 verse 24 states that in marriage, two people become one. Why then did polygamy exist among God's people? Well, first, it allowed families to produce more offspring to help provide labor and to assure the continuation of the family line. Numerous children were a symbol of a status and health and wealth. Number two is in societies where many young men were killed in battle, polygamy became an accepted way of supporting women who otherwise would have remained unmarried and very likely destitute. Nevertheless, polygamy is never endorsed in the Bible. On the contrary, it usually caused serious family problems, as we see in the story of Hannah and Peninnah. Now, another thing with adultery being in Scripture is I think it also gives us a good idea of what a lifestyle like that does, and the pain and the suffering and the problems that arise from a man having more than one wife. And if you really need some reassurance in that, if you read David, and definitely if you read Solomon, he married he had over 1,000 wives. So I mean, they're great examples of why a man should really have one wife. I told my husband yesterday, I asked him, I'm like, could you imagine having more than one wife? I think with 3 wives, you'd go crazy. It would just be too much. And he laughed. So yeah. So God didn't accept this, but he did allow these things to happen, and we can learn from this. Verse 3, each year Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priest of the Lord at that time were the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. These men were horrible. They were really horrible. Now, the thing about Eli is that Eli, and very much just like Samuel, Eli looked the other way to his son's sins. He really didn't reprimand them in their sins. Now, remember that these are the ones who are supposed to be clean. They're supposed to be righteous. They're supposed to be holy. They are the ones who go before the Lord and speak to the Lord. But these 2 men, they abused that kind of power that they had, or really they abused that kind of job that they were supposed to do. Okay, that would be too much. Forget who it was, but someone in the Bible had 70 wives. Yeah, I don't know. I know that Solomon had 1,000 wives. I think he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Concubines were pretty much wives. Now, wives, they would get, they would be the first, okay? And then a concubine was second. Another reason why men had concubines in the Bible, or in those days, is because women were not supposed... It was very bad if a woman was by herself. There's women who are by themselves for many, many reasons. But for her to be by herself would have caused her to be killed or to be harmed in a physical manner. It was not good for a woman to be by herself. So men would typically bring concubines or take concubines for themselves to basically give them that, to provide for them, to give them that, that they were going to take care of them, basically, being providing for them, basically. That's who it was, 700. Yeah, Solomon. But again, God did not approve of it. He did not accept of it. Missed you. God bless you and your family. Thank you, Elaine. I missed you guys too. It's been crazy with homeschooling, and it's just been a lot. And I've been really trying to stick to really my personal time with the Lord. So it's great to be back. But I'm doing 1 Samuel, if you're just joining 1 Samuel. And I'm in chapter 1. I might read chapter 2. I don't know. So that's that. And let me just say that if you haven't read Samuel, or even if you have read Samuel, it's a crazy ride. There are things in there that's whoa, this is crazy. Things in there that you're just oh my goodness, really? I've been having those one-on-one talks with God, really, God? Really? That happened? They did that? Why did they do that? They should not have done that. Even I can see that they shouldn't have done that. It's so crazy, the things that are in here. My goodness. Honestly, this right here, this whole situation with this family, that would be one great movie. I don't know why they don't make these movies like based on the stories in scripture, because they are crazy. It's insane. So I'm in verse 4. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice. So this is the husband to Hannah. On the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion, because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. I tell you, Hannah had some amazing faith. She was obedient. I couldn't, like, being a woman, I've tried to put myself in her situation. I don't know. That probably would have, like, broke me down. Like, it's sad because here she is, and to be a woman and to not have children in these times, it was hard. It was not good. You know, the question would be like, why? And we don't really know the situation of why he had two wives. We can assume that maybe because Hannah couldn't have children, maybe he took on a second wife because he wanted to have children, because it was a desire for man. And we see like Abraham's wife, you know, basically had him do this thing with her slave girl. And I mean, it was to be a woman to not have children and then to be married to a man who has another wife who has had many children. That is horrible. That's hard. So Hannah definitely had a lot of faith, and for her to be able to, I mean, obviously it was hard for her, as I'll read in a moment, and how horrible to make fun of her. And you know, Peninnah didn't have Elkanah's love. Hannah did. So I could see why Peninnah would be jealous, but she was given so many children. You know, it's kind of like Rachel and Rebecca, I think it was, or who was it? It was Rachel and Leah, I believe. So yeah, so that was verse 6. Here's what my commentary says. Hannah had been unable to conceive children, and in the Old Testament times, childless women were seen as flawed and inferior to women who could bear children. The barrenness was a social embarrassment for their husbands. Children were a very important part of the society's economic structure. They were a source of labor for their families, and they had the duty of caring for their parents in their old age. If a wife could not bear children, she was often obligated by ancient Middle Eastern customs to give one of her servant girls to her husband and bear children for her. And we saw that with Abraham and his wife. Although Elkanah could have left Hannah, and a husband was permitted to divorce a barren wife, he remained lovingly devoted to her despite social pressure and his rights under civil law. But even still, to put yourself in that situation, verse 7. Year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. So, part of God's plan for Hannah involved postponing her years of childbearing. While Peninnah looked at Hannah's outward circumstances, God was moving ahead with his plan. Think of those in your world who are struggling with God's timing and answering their prayers and who need your love and help. By supporting them, you may help them to remain steadfast in their faith and confident in God's timing to bring fulfillment to their lives. I mean, honestly, we have really no excuse to, not wait on God's timing. I think throughout scripture, we see time and time again, especially as women, that, God everything is done in his time. Everything will come together in his time and according to his will. But yeah, if they would have just if he would have just waited, you know. And it also kind of shows, if that's the case, if he married another woman or took this other woman because she couldn't have kids, that was kind of a lack of faith there, because, you know, Hannah, she prayed, and she prayed earnestly to God to give her children. So it was kind of a lack of faith on his part, in a sense. Verse 8, "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why aren't you eating?" I mean, really? Really? Like, I'm sure that he saw the situation of his wife and Peninnah. But he goes on to say, "Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons? A little selfishness there. I mean, again, we can't understand because we live in this culture today. I mean, some will, but back then it was a different situation, a different kind of heartache for a woman to not be able to give her husband children. You know, it was almost like an embarrassment, as I had read before. So for him to say that was pretty, that was not him thinking about her and her feelings. So Hannah knew her husband loved her, but even his encouragement could not comfort her. She could not keep from hearing Peninnah's jeers and letting her hurtful words erode her self-confidence. Although we cannot keep others from unjustly criticizing us, we can choose how we will react to their words. Rather than dwelling upon our problems, we can enjoy the loving relationships God has given us. Verse 9. This is going into Hannah's prayer for a son. "Once after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle." Let me ask you this. Do you guys want me just to read, or do you like when I read it and then I stop and read the commentary? Or should I read like a couple of verses and then read the commentary? Let me read this while I'm waiting on that. So Hannah had good reason to feel discouraged and bitter. She was unable to bear children. She shared her husband with a woman who ridiculed her. Her loving husband could not solve her problem, and even the high priest misunderstood her motives. But instead of reacting with anger or giving up hope, Hannah prayed. She brought her problem honestly before God. We may face times of barrenness when nothing comes to birth, in our work, our service, or our relationships. Praying in faith is difficult when we feel so ineffective and alone. But as Hannah discovered, prayer opens the way for God to work. So Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: "O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayers and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut." So in return for being able to conceive a son, Hannah vowed to dedicate him to God for lifetime service. Hannah may have been making a Nazirite vow, which parents could take for their unborn children. The Nazirite vow promised that a person would be set apart for special service to God. There's no also Numbers 6 and Judges 13 go along with that. As long as the vow was in effect, the person's hair could not be cut. Although some vows were temporary, Hannah's vow for Samuel was for life. Choice is beautiful. Commentary after a couple verses. Okay. I missed you so much in your last talks. After, it's whatever you feel best to you. Oh, I missed you guys too. Carol, thank you for joining me. Yes, 1 Samuel is an amazing, amazing book of the Bible. So I'm really glad to be able to read it. So be careful what you promise in prayer, because God may hold you to it. He does hold us to it because scripture, God says, let your yeses be yes and your noes be no. So remember that any vow you make, any promise you make, to see it fully, because God takes that seriously. Hannah so desperately wanted a child that she was willing to strike a bargain with God. God took her up on her promise, and to Hannah's credit, she kept her word, even though it must have been painful. I mean, now you see the situation of this woman where now she's praying to God for a son. And in this, I mean, the vows she's making are hard. I mean, it's a horrible feeling. Like, I can't imagine having my children and then just giving them up the moment that, they're born to dedicate. I mean, it had to have been very, very painful for Hannah, but she was a strong woman, I tell you that. Although we are not in a position to barter with God, he may still choose to answer a prayer that has an attached promise. When you pray, ask yourself, will I follow through on any promises I make to God if he gives me what I ask? To ignore a promise, especially to God, is dishonest and potentially disastrous. God keeps his promises, and he expects us to keep ours. Hannah fulfilled her promise to God, and he blessed her with 5 more children. As she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her. Seeing her lips moving, but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. It's like, you're a priest, you shouldn't just assume. I'm just giving my thoughts. Like, I've said this to God, like, he's a priest, and he's just assuming, or maybe he had never seen something like this before. I don't know. Must you come here drunk? He demanded. Throw away your wine. Oh no, sir, she replied. I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. She was praying so much and so hard that she couldn't even get the words out of her mouth. She was just there in silence. Like, there's nothing coming out. Seeing her lips moving, but hearing no sound. Today, it's funny because you have a lot of people where it's like, when they're praying, there's all that gibberish that's going on, and it's like, here's this woman praying so hard and nothing's coming out. She's obviously in tears. She's going through so much, and she's praying, and then this man is like thinking, put away your wine, you're drunk. And it's like, my heart breaks for the woman at this time. So let me go ahead and read my commentary. So when you notice that something seems wrong with another person, what is your first reaction? Eli made a snap judgment about Hannah before he knew all the facts. It is easy to misunderstand motives and actions, and doing so can cause us to make assumptions about others that are not true. Be sensitive to the fact that, like Hannah, anyone you encounter may be carrying a tremendous burden. Verse 17, and his demeanor changes here. In that case, Eli said, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. Which is interesting. Did she know that he was a priest? I mean, for him to... And the thing is that wasn't a priest supposed to pray first? Not just say, oh, well, God's going to do this thing? Which is kind of interesting. So earlier, Hannah had been discouraged to the point of being physically sick and unable to eat. At this point, she returned home well and happy. The change in her attitude may be attributed to 3 factors. First, she had prayed honestly to God, not holding anything back from him. 2, she had received encouragement from Eli. And 3, she had resolved the problem with God. This is the antidote for discouragement. Tell God how you really feel and leave your problems with him. Then rely upon the support of good friends and counselors. verse 19. Samuel's birth and dedication. The entire family got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. When Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. The next year, Elkanah and his family went on their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and keep his vow. But Hannah did not go. She told her husband, wait until the boy is weaned. Then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently. Whatever you think is best, Elkanah agreed. Stay here for now, and may the Lord help you keep your promise. So she stayed home and nursed the boy until he was weaned. When the child was weaned, Hannah took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh. They brought along a 3-year-old bull for the sacrifice of a basket of flour and some wine. After sacrificing the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. Sir, do you remember me? Hannah asked. I am the very woman who stood here several years ago praying to the Lord. So we see that it's been 7 years since that situation happened. So he's probably about, 5 or 6 maybe? I am the very woman who stood here several years ago and praying to the Lord. I asked the Lord to give me this boy, and he has granted my request. Now I am going to give him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life. And they worship the Lord there. So, to do what she promised, Hannah gave up what she wanted most, her son, and presented him to Eli to serve in the house of the Lord. In dedicating her only son to God, Hannah was dedicating her entire life and future to him. How amazing and how beautiful that is. That right there is faith. That is strong faith right there, and strong love for God. Because Samuel's life was from God, Hannah was not really giving him up. Rather, she was returning him to God, who had been the one who gave him to Hannah in the first place. And you know that's a reminder for us women who have children that our children are not, we don't own our children. You know, they are gifts that God has given to us to obediently dedicate to him in a sense. You know, we teach them, we raise them, we teach them to do what is right. We teach them to have morals, and we teach them to love the Lord, to grow into adults who want to bring honor and glory to the Lord. And then we have to remember that we have to be okay with whatever is in God's will. You know, as parents, we can kind of forget that even though we're in charge of our children, ultimately, it's nothing compared to what God has established for their life, and he will make sure that these things happen. And so it's something that we have to remind ourselves as parents, and that's hard. But like Hannah had faith in dedicating her son to the Lord and giving him back one of the most desired things, you know, in her heart, and she was willing to give him back to God. And we need to also have faith in that way. As a mom who is, you know, has 4 kids, and 2 of them are going to be adults here very shortly. They're 17, almost 18, and my boy, he lives with us, and that's hard for me because I think about he's going to be on his own very shortly, and it's scary, but that is life. And yeah, we have to trust that God's will is going to happen regardless what we think or want. So Samuel was at least 3 years old. The customary age of weaning was 3 to 5 years or even older. When his mother left him at the tabernacle by saying, I am giving him to the Lord, Hannah meant that she was dedicating Samuel to God for lifetime service. She did not, of course, forget her much wanted son. She visited him regularly, and each year she brought him a new robe to wear. In later years, Samuel lived in Ramah, his parents' hometown. So that is chapter 1. Should I read chapter 2? Hannah's prayer of praise. Let me read this real quick. One thing I like about this Bible is that when it comes to the people, it gives you a little background about them and their strengths and their weaknesses and so forth. Hi, Crystal. So, Elkanah and Peninnah. Spouses can be insensitive for many reasons, but they often simply suffer from ignorance. Elkanah had 2 wives, which doubled his opportunities to seem insensitive. His wife Peninnah was able to give Elkanah many children. His other wife, Hannah, owned his heart, but was unable to get pregnant. Peninnah, jealous that providing Elkanah with heirs didn't turn his affections toward her, treated Hannah with disdain. Yet it seems that Elkanah was oblivious to the turmoil around him. Although the events leading up to the birth of Samuel primarily involved Hannah, both Elkanah and Peninnah played significant roles in the story. Peninnah's competitiveness and derision caused Hannah deep anguish, which Hannah took to God in prayer. Elkanah's simple love allowed Hannah to entrust their first child, Samuel, into God's care. Elkanah didn't realize that a little attention toward Peninnah could have cooled the simmering emotions in his home, nor did he understand that his love for Hannah didn't make up for the emptiness of her womb. The glimpse God gives us of this tense household provides a helpful backdrop for God's purposes, which are not thwarted by human shortcomings. We worked within the strain and stress of those relationships to bring Samuel, one of the most significant figures in the Old Testament, into the world. When our relational systems seem too gnarled to be unraveled or salvaged, we need to remember that God displays his creativity not only by making things from scratch, but also by bringing order and beauty out of messes. So, some lessons to learn from their lives is, first, ignorance is not a good excuse for insensitivity. Jealousy is not a good excuse for bad behavior, and God works in and through family messes. Let's see. I was told once by a preacher that our children are just borrowed to us when they belong to God. I have needs son, so I understand that he's lived in a hospital setting since he was 16. He's 50 now, and God has blessed us. He was not to live this long. I agree 100%. You know, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say borrowed, but I mean, pretty much. Our children are not, while they come from us, their soul and their spirit is from God. God has created them, you know, and we can only do so much as parents. But the rest, we have to just trust God, that God's will is going to be done. But that's amazing. Blessings to God that he did live that long. And he has lived that long, and hopefully he lives even longer. But it's hard. It's hard because as parents, you know, we know that everything is in God's will. Everything is in it's according to his wishes and not our own. And that can be scary. That can be hard. And especially if you're the kind of person who likes to have control of every situation, you know? But yeah, I would agree. So, hold on. So the thing about this Bible, I like this Bible because it's very easy to read, but I really like because at the bottom of it, it will, like, some verses will have a star, and that means that there's some additional footnotes, And in those footnotes, it will tell you what the original text says, and it will convert certain amounts, which I think is pretty cool. And it'll tell you, like, for instance, as in the Dead Sea Scrolls in Greek version, Masoretic text reads, "May the Lord keep his promise." So I really like that because it does give you the original context. So yeah, Hannah's prayer of praise. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 2. Then Hannah prayed, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. Now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me. No one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Stop acting so proud and haughty. Don't speak with such arrogance. For the Lord is a God who knows what you have done. He will judge your actions. The bow of the mighty is now broken, and those who stumbled are now strong. Those who were well fed are now starving, and those who were starving are now full. The childless woman now has 7 children, and the woman with many children wastes away. The Lord gives both death and life. He brings some down to the grave, but raises others up. The Lord makes some poor and others rich. He brings some down and lifts others up. He lifts the poor from the dust and the needy from the garbage dump. He sets them among princes, placing them in seats of honor. For all the earth is the Lord's, and he has set the world in order. He will protect his faithful ones, but the wicked will disappear in darkness. No one will succeed by strength alone. Those who fight against the Lord will be shattered. He thunders against them from heaven. The Lord judges throughout the earth. He gives power to his king. He increases the strength of his anointed one. When you read this, it goes to show, when you read this, you clearly can think about and see and picture God's strength and how mighty he is and how glorious that he is. And, in our culture today, they make God seem as if he's like this wimpy kind of God, but how wonderful that he is basically in control of everything. It is all in his hands, all in his control. He protects his faithful ones. The wicked will disappear in darkness. It's talking, in regards to hell. It is him who gives the person who succeeds by strength alone. Those who try to fight against God will be shattered. There's no hope for them. They'll be destroyed. There's just not even a chance. He gives power to his kings. He increases the strengths of his anointed ones. He increased the strength of David. He makes some poor. He makes some rich. He knows everybody's heart. He definitely is mighty. He is powerful. He is all-knowing, all-seeing, almighty. So, yeah, this was Hannah's prayer of praise and how wonderful it is. Thank you for your readings. Nice to meet you. I followed. Oh, thank you, B. All right, so let me read the commentary part of this. Because we live in a world where evil abounds and where war and terrorism always threaten, we may forget that God is in control. Hannah saw God as, first, a solid as a rock. 2, the one who knows what we do. 3, he is sovereign over everything and everyone. And 4, the supreme judge who administers perfect justice. Remembering God's sovereign control helps us put both world and personal events in perspective. Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli the priest. In other words, Samuel was Eli's helper or assistant. In this role, Samuel's responsibilities would have included opening the tabernacle entrances each morning, cleaning the furniture, sweeping the floors, As he grew older, he would have assisted Eli in offering sacrifices, wearing a special linen garment like those worn by the priest, in Hebrew called an ephod. Showed that he was a priest in training. Because Samuel was Eli's helper, he was God's helper too. When we serve others, even in carrying out ordinary tasks, we are serving God, and God's servant, every job is dignity. Now, or has dignity. As a homemaker, as a woman who, I am a mother, I am a wife, I am a cook, I am a maid, I am everything. All of these things, I can get, at the end of the day, it can feel like the things that I've done throughout the day sometimes aren't that important, or they don't seem like they were important, but I have to remind myself that I'm doing this as a sacrifice to God. My job as woman is to be the mother and to be the wife and to be the homemaker, and that's what I am. And sometimes it can feel like my family does an amazing job of making me feel like, the things that I do is wonderful. They give me encouragement. But I guess it's me being hard on myself a lot of times, thinking about the things that I do and thinking, did this really impact my family in the way that it should, and I have to remind myself I'm doing this ultimately for God, because this is where God has placed me. He's put me here, and I have to give my all to him. So it's something that I have to remind myself, and I would encourage you, if you're a homemaker, or even if you're not a homemaker, and let's say that you are in the corporate job, right, and working in a corporate job, or working wherever, working outside of the home, it can feel like I don't feel appreciated, and I don't feel like what I'm doing is, worthy or whatever. And we have to remember that even if we're working outside of the home, we need to do it for God, and we need to do it for the glory of God. Even if it's something like taking out the trash, do it for the glory of God. It seems silly, but it's true. Everything should be for him and glorifying him and honoring him. The jab alters DNA. It's the mark. So the jab is not the mark. But yeah, it does do things to your body. That's not good. But this is about Samuel. I really don't want to go into that, but that's definitely not the mark. I can tell you that. So if you're a woman in your home or you're outside working, just know that God sees you. He sees what you're doing, and he takes that and he notices it, and he takes it into account. So just remember that God sees what you do, and just do it for him. Just continue to do it for him. So then Elkanah returned home to Ramah without Samuel, and the boy served the Lord by assisting Eli the priest. Eli's wicked sons. I told you, his two sons. Whew, it's wild. It's crazy the things that they did. Like, when you read this, it's like, oh my goodness. Now the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. Whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, Eli's sons would send over a servant with a 3-pronged fork. While the meat of the sacrificed animal was still boiling, the servant would stick the fork into the pot and demand that whatever it brought up be given to Eli's sons. All the Israelites who came to worship at Shiloh were treated this way. Sometimes the servant would come even before the animal's fat had been burned on the altar. He would demand raw meat before it had been boiled so that it could not be used for roasting. Now, priests were obligated to give an offering first, okay? While the priests were the first ones to eat, they would have been the first to eat, they should have been, that the sacrifice was for God, okay? God would have them cook certain parts of the animal, and it says that the smell would be pleasing to the Lord. Now, obviously, God doesn't really have a nose. He's not a human like us. He is a spirit. But it was basically, it's trying to make it clear that this was what God was pleasing to God. Okay, this is what God had commanded. What he saw was right. But these men would have come in, and instead of giving the first to God, they took it for themselves. They had clear commands on how things were supposed to be done, how food was supposed to be handled, how food was supposed to be cooked, how they were supposed to act as priests, and they clearly had a problem with it, and they put themselves before the Lord. Very terrifying, very scary to be a priest. I mean, you are God's helper here. Like, you're not just an ordinary person, you are a priest. You were born to be a priest, to do these things. You're a Levite. But my goodness, it's crazy. Okay, so the law stipulated that the needs of all the Levites, those are the priests, were to be met through the people's tithes. Okay, Numbers 18, 20, verses 20 and 20 to 24. Joshua chapter 13, verse 14 and verse 33. Because Eli's sons were priests, they were to be provided for in this way. But Eli's sons took advantage of their position to satisfy their lust for power, sex, possessions, and control. Their contempt and arrogance toward people, both people and worship, undermined the integrity of the whole priesthood. Their evil ways contrasted sharply with young Samuel's attitude and values, which showed complete commitment to God. Eli knew that his sons were evil, but he did little to correct or stop them, even when the integrity of God's sanctuary was threatened. As the high priest, now he was the high priest. These are his priests. He is the high priest. And it's important to also remember that when it came to the priest, that was something that was in the bloodline. So Eli was a high priest, and then his sons were priests, and then their sons would be priests, and their sons would be priests, and the whole lineage would be to be priests, right? The Levites. But God does away with that lineage of them and ends up giving it to Samuel. And Samuel, obviously Eli wasn't a great, in that way of parenting, he really wasn't a good example for Samuel, because Samuel ends up doing the same kind of thing that Eli does with his sons, turning a blind eye, not ever confronting it. And he should have confronted it, because that was important. You couldn't put your sons or your children before your God. God comes first. You know, when it came to Cain and Abel, right? I think Cain was the tiller of the ground. Abel was a shepherd. And Abel would give the first perfect lamb, he would give it to God as an offering. And Cain wouldn't. He wouldn't give the first of his to God. He put God last, and he put himself first. And it's the same thing with these men. These men are doing the same things here. They're putting themselves first, but they're supposed to put God first, because that's their job. That's what they were created for, right? So Eli, as the high priest, Eli should have responded by banishing or even executing his sons. Sounds harsh, but that's what he should have done, because God comes first. No wonder he chose not to confront the situation, but by ignoring their selfish actions, Eli let his sons ruin their own lives and the lives of many others. Another thing to think of is when we have children and we don't correct them, we're setting our children up for worse consequences in the future. We have to discipline our children. Today, it's like this thing. It's like, what is it called? It's called gentle parenting or something. And it's crazy to the extent of this gentle parenting. But as parents and as the adults, our job is to correct our children and to raise them in the way that they should go. To overlook what they're doing, I mean, it gets so bad that God comes and he takes Eli's sons. He kills them, because Eli, he didn't do what he should have done to them. That might have spared them in reality, to punish them and to show them how they should act. That there could have been a better outcome than what actually happens in the end. And the story of Eli can also be a very good parenting guide of what not to do. Okay. So yeah. So what were Eli's sons doing wrong? Okay. They were taking parts of the sacrifices before they were offered to God on the altar. They were also eating meat before the fat was burned off, which was against God's law. I'm going to go to Leviticus chapter 3. And I just want to read what the law says. Chapter 3, verses 3 through 5. The priest must present part of the peace offering as a spiritual gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and Aaron's sons will burn them on top of the burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So Aaron's sons, okay, those are the priests. So yeah, in effect, Eli's sons were treating God's offerings with contempt. Offerings were given to show honor and respect to God while seeking forgiveness for sins. But through their irreverence, Eli's sons were actually sinning while making the offerings. And to add to their sins, they were also sleeping with the women who served at the tabernacle. Like Eli's sons, some religious leaders look down on the faith of ordinary people and treat their offerings to God casually or even with contempt. God harshly judges those who lead his people astray or scorn what has been devoted to him. Numbers 18:32. So very important, very dangerous thing. So 13 to 14 also says, or for their duties as priests, whenever anyone offered a sacrifice, Eli's sons would send over a servant with a 3-pronged fork. While the meat of the sacrificed animal was still boiling, the servant would stick the fork into the pot and demand that whatever it brought up be given to Eli's sons. So this fork was a utensil used in the tabernacle to handle the sacrificial meat. It was made of bronze. Exodus 27 verse 3 tells us that. It usually had 3 prongs to hook the meat as it was put on the altar or cooked in a boiling pot. Eli's sons used this fork to take more meat from the pot than was due. Though the burnt offerings were burned completely on the altar, some of the offerings were cooked and shared among the priest and worshipers in a celebration feast. So in addition to other sons, Eli's sons were stealing more than their share of meat from the families worshiping at the tabernacle. You understand how bad that is? Like, they're stealing more than the share of meat from the families worshiping at the tabernacle. My goodness. What is wrong with them? Oh my goodness. This is not, guys, this is not something that is taken lightly at this time. We need to be thankful that we're under a new covenant, that Christ came and he was the ultimate sacrifice of sacrifices and offerings. At this point, my goodness, that's bad. Okay, that's bad. So the man offering the sacrifice might reply, "Take as much as you want, but the fat must be burned first." Then the servant would demand, "No, give it to me now, or I'll take it by force." So now they're like, "I'll take it," like they're threatening. So the sin of these young men was very serious in the Lord's sight, for they treated the Lord's offering with contempt. But Samuel, though he was only a boy, served the Lord. He wore a linen garment like that of a priest, and each year his mother made a small coat for him and brought it to him when she came with her husband for the sacrifice. Before they returned home, Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you other children to take the place of this one she gave the Lord." And the Lord blessed Hannah, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. So Samuel was a young child, and yet he served the Lord. Children can often serve God just as effectively as adults. God will use anyone who is willing to learn from him and serve him. He has no age limits. We shouldn't discount the faith of a child or let age keep anyone from serving God. It's also in 1 Timothy 4:12. So Samuel wore a special linen garment in Hebrew called an ephod. These long, sleeveless vests made of plain linen were worn by all priests. The high priest ephod carried special significance. It was embroidered with a variety of bright colors. Attached to it was the chest piece, a bib-like garment with gold embroidered shoulder straps. 12 precious gemstones were attached to the chest plate, each stone representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. This chest piece also provided a pouch to hold the Urim and the Thummim, 2 small objects used to determine God's will in certain national matters. So God honored the desires of faithful Hannah. We never hear about Peninnah or her children again, but Samuel was used mightily by God. God also gave Hannah 5 children in addition to Samuel. God often blesses us in ways we do not expect. Hannah didn't dare expect to have a child at her age, much less 6 children. Fight the temptation to resist or to resent God's timing when he tells you to wait. His blessings might not be immediate, but he will bless us if we are faithful to do what he says in his word. Now Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing and the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. Eli said to them, "I have been hearing reports from all the people about the wicked things you are doing. Why do you keep sinning? You must stop, my sons. The reports I hear among the Lord's people are not good. If someone sins against another person, God can mediate for the guilty party. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede?" But Eli's sons wouldn't listen to their father, for the Lord was already planning to put them to death. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew taller and grew in favor with the Lord and with the people. So you see how these men were evil, and Hannah, in her obedience, she prayed earnestly to God, eagerly, and God blessed her with a son. And she dedicates this son to God. And God uses this son to take the place of these 2 men who were Eli's sons. You see how God's plan always works out and is perfect. Like the timing, wonderful timing here that we're seeing. So, Eli's sons knew better, but they continued to disobey God deliberately by cheating, seducing, and robbing the people. Therefore, God planned to execute them. Any sin is wrong, but sin carried out deliberately and deceitfully, especially in a religious context, is the worst kind. When we sin out of ignorance, we deserve punishment. But when we sin intentionally, the consequences will be more severe. Don't ignore God's warnings about sin. When we find ourselves continuing in habitual sin, we need to reach out to God and other believers to seek forgiveness and find help in turning from it. Hi, Southern Grits. Chapter 2, verse 27, a warning for Eli's family. One day a man of God came to Eli to give him this message from the Lord. I revealed myself to your ancestors when they were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt. This is a long time, by the way. A long time. I chose your ancestor Aaron from among all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer sacrifices on my altar, to burn incense, and to wear the priestly vest as he served me. And I assign the sacrificial offerings to you, priest. So why do you scorn my sacrifices and offerings? Why do you give your sons more honor than you give me? So now not only were his sons sinning, now Eli is sinning because he's giving more honor to his sons than he's giving honor to God. For you and they have become fat from the best offerings of my people Israel. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel says, I promise that your branch of the tribe of Levi would always be my priest. But I will honor those who honor me. I will despise those who think lightly of me. This is some harsh words. The time is coming when I will put an end to your family, so it will no longer serve as my priest. All the members of your family will die before their time. None will reach old age. You will watch with envy as I pour out prosperity on the people of Israel, but no members of your family will ever live out their days. The few not cut off from serving at my altar will survive, but only so their eyes can go blind and their hearts break, and their children will die a violent death. And to prove that what I have said will come true, I will cause your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, to die on the same day. Then I will raise up a faithful priest who will serve me and do what I desire. I will establish his family, and they will be priests to my anointed kings forever. Then all of your surviving family will bow before him, begging for money and food. Please, they will say, give us jobs among the priests, so we will have enough to eat. Not good. Definitely not good. So, all right, does our loving God really will or want to put people to death? That is the question. Now, it's important to understand, because this can sound harsh, okay? But you have to remember that God was not going to allow this to be an example for others. If God overlooked this, something that was very, very powerful, something that God, putting God first, giving God the best of the best, for him to overlook that, well, what kind of God would that have been to overlook it? Eli was sinning by overlooking his sons and what they were doing. Yeah, he tells them one time, don't do this. But I mean, really, it was in my opinion, probably one of the most sweetest ways of him saying it versus how he could have really said it to really impact them. So for God to have done, if God would have done what Eli did, what would have happened there? So it can sound very, very harsh, but we have to understand that God, when he expects us to do something, he expects us to do it. And so if we don't do it in that way, what kind of example does this set for people in the future? There's a lot of things that can happen if God would have just overlooked this. We see that Eli, he should have told his sons, he should have warned his sons, he should have reprimanded them. And then not only that, God, this is a lot of time. God gives a lot of time for them to turn from their ways, but they don't. you know, and God says, I will take their lives. It's become so bad and so horrible, I will take their lives. So consider the situation in the tabernacle. A person would make an offering in order to have sin forgiven. Eli's sons would steal the offering and make a sham of the person's repentant attitude. Think about that. Really think about that. And then think if God's punishment was really harsh. God, in his love for Israel, could not permit the situation to continue. He allowed Eli's sons to die as a result of their own boastful presumption. They took the ark into battle, which is a whole nother story, thinking it would protect them, but God withdrew his protection. And the wicked sons of Eli were killed. I think we're getting into that actually, about the ark. Let me see. Yeah, so the ark situation, that is craziness. Eli had a difficult time raising his sons. He apparently did not take any strong disciplinary action with them when he became aware of the wrongdoing. But Eli was not just a father trying to handle his rebellious sons. He was the high priest, ignoring the sins of priests under his supervision. As a result, the Lord took the necessary disciplinary action that Eli would not. Eli was guilty of honoring his sons above God by letting them continue their sinful actions. Is there a situation in your life or family or work that you allow to continue even though you know it is wrong? If so, you may become as guilty as those engaged in the wrong act. Honor God more highly than anything else, and don't wait for him to intervene for you. God will protect the children. Yes, as children. Carol Chance. So this that goes deeper than when you're reading it. You could read this passage and you can miss so much in this and just jump to, my goodness, he sounds like he's such a harsh God, like a mean God. But this is a huge picture, and something that we have to remember is that God is God and we are not. God does not look at things the same way that we as humans look at. We look at it through a sinful view, a humanistic kind of view. God is looking at it as the all-knowing, all-seeing, almighty God that he is. He's seeing the things that we don't see. He's seeing the future that we do not see. His will that he's established is going to come true. It's going to happen. So it goes farther than what you can even really read, because their job as priests was to honor God. And can you imagine if God's priests get out of hand? What does that say to the other people who come and offer these sacrifices? So they're stealing from the Lord. Instead of doing the offerings to God first, they're taking from God to fill their own stomachs. They are having relations with women when they shouldn't. They are abusing what it means to be a priest, and their responsibilities, which glorifies God. They're basically, they're stealing from the people. Here's people, they are repenting, they are offering these sacrifices to be forgiven, and they're stealing from the people. It's a lot of things that they're doing here that just can't be overlooked. And had Eli just disciplined his children like he should have, I think that this could have probably gone a whole different way. But he didn't. And I think it shows us as parents, it gives us a pretty good idea of how we are to hold order in our own home when it comes to our children. A lot of sinfulness, just like today. Absolutely. Absolutely. He is, okay. Wait, he has allowed your child to live. Oh, you're to Carol. So I just read chapter 1, chapter 2. I'm not going to read chapter 3, but I will give you a little view into what happened. So basically, Eli's sons, for whatever reason, thought that it would be a great idea to take the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Lord, and to bring it into battle with the Philistines, and they end up getting it taken by the Philistines. The Philistines end up taking the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God. They take it. Now, back then, they would, when you would go into battle and you won that battle, you would take things that represented their God. Okay? So the Ark of God, or the Ark of the Covenant, that was the Israelites. That represented, this was supposed to be protected. This was never to be taken and used as a weapon. Okay? It was meant to be protected. It was a box. It was gold. It had the cherubim on it. Cherubim are the highest angels there are in heaven. They're go around the throne of God saying holy, 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 just all the time, holy, holy, holy. And you could not touch it. You were forbidden from touching it unless you prepared yourself for cleanliness. You were forbidden from looking into this, but they take this into battle for them, okay? Thinking that there's that God's power is somehow in this box, which it's not. The power is not in the box, despite what a lot of people think. It was just an object. But the purpose of this, it was supposed to be protected. It was supposed to stay in a place where it could be protected and taken care of and would not have been taken. Well, they decided to take it, use it into battle. Oh, God's power must be in this. We need to go to war with them. So they do that. The Philistines, they take it. Now the question is, anybody who touched the ark or looked in the ark would be killed. The Philistines touch the ark. They're not killed. And the reason for that is because the Philistines did not know anything about this, the Ark of the Covenant. Okay, so they wouldn't be held accountable because they didn't know that they weren't supposed to handle it or touch it or anything. This is what was normal for them, to go to war with another nation or another people, and then you would take what represented their God and you would place it in front of your God as a way of saying, our God defeated their God. And so it's funny because the Philistines take this and place it in their own temple with their own God, Dagon. And it's funny because they go away from it. The next morning, their little statue figure of Dagon has fallen. Okay? And so they pick it up, they place it up there, it sits there, close the door, same thing. It falls again the next morning. The Dagon is fallen in front of the Ark of the Covenant. And it happens, I think, 7 times. And so finally, the 7th time, they do the same thing. Well, we're going to put it right in front of the Ark of the Covenant, you would have gotten it at this point. And then this time it just smashes. And the arms break off, the legs break off, and the head breaks off. Dang, I love God's humor. That is just, it's humorous. When you really think about it, it is hilarious because it's God's way of saying, I am the God Almighty. No one has any authority or power over me. No one can control me. No one can take me. God is in control of everything. And it's just so funny because it's that's God's sense of humor there. It's just funny when you read it. It's hilarious. But it's also, oh my goodness, why? Even I know that was a horrible, horrible thing to do. To take this into battle, there's no actual power. There was no actual power in it. It was more about a symbol, because it was a symbol that represented God, but it was just an object, and they take it into battle. I mean, there's another situation where David and another man, they take the Ark of the Covenant, and I forgot how, but they're taking it back, and they're trying to place it from one spot to the other, and it's about to fall, okay? And so the guy goes and he grabs it, like, oh, I can't let that thing fall. Let me try and grab it, and before it like shatters or falls on the ground, you know? While he had good intentions, God killed him for that. And the reason why, and this goes to show that it was just an object, is that God would have rather that to fall than for somebody who was a priest who knew they were not supposed to touch this, for them to go against God in disobedience and touch it. So it's the same in a way, the same situation. You're a priest, you know you shouldn't touch it. Like, yes, this is something that represents God, but at the same time, God wants you to be more obedient to what he has told you versus, you know, trying to, while he had a sincere heart, he didn't mean anything by it, but it was that, you know, you knew what God had said, and you should have remembered that, and you should have just let it fall, because it was just an object. God demands our obedience. He demands us to be obedient to him. Now, thankfully, that was in like the Old Testament. That's not going to happen today. But even still, when we think of things in a spiritual sense, it's the same. God wants us to be obedient. We have to be obedient to God, to the Lord. And it's just for our protection. It's for us to be righteous and holy. It's to protect us, to guide us. So, but the story with Dagon and the Ark of the Covenant, it's great. You know, it's sad, but it's so funny. It's like the head gets broken off, the arms get broken off, the legs get broken off. Like, all there is like the body. Your God's really not that powerful, is it? So I think that's it for the stream. I'm going to get off now because I'm tired, really tired. I've been on for an hour and 17 minutes, but thank you guys for spending this time with me. I appreciate it. Thank you for your support. And yeah, it's a great story. If you haven't, I would very highly suggest you go ahead and read through the book of Samuel, because it's amazing, it's powerful, it's funny, it's sad, it can anger you in some parts, and it's a crazy ride. Like, it really is a crazy ride. But I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching the stream, and I will see you in my next video. Take care, have a good night, and God bless.